It's the week ending Saturday, the 10th of August, and this is The Week Unwrapped. In the past 7 days, we've seen British Airways grounding flights after an IT failure, a child hospitalised after allegedly being thrown from a viewing platform at Tate Modern, and President Donald Trump facing protests by those grieving in El Paso. But we're here to bring you some stories that passed under the radar this week. Big news, not making headlines right now, but with repercussions for all our lives. I'm Olly Mann. Let's unwrap the week. And joining me today from the Week's digital team, we have Rebecca Gillie. From the Week Junior, we welcome back Felicity Capon. And making his Week Unwrapped debut from the Week magazine. Yes, there is a print version of this podcast. Who knew? It is Theo Tait. Hello, Theo. Let's get to know you. Your dream dinner party lineup, if you please.
I've always been obsessed with wanting to meet Tony Blair, particularly in his kind of retired, suntanned, globe-trotting, slightly empty-eyed version. I want to get close to him and really see what's going on. Just me and Tony.
That's not really a dinner party. That's a date.
For me.
And Theo is starting the show this week. What do you think you'd be telling Tony this week should be remembered for?
Well, I hope I'm wrong, but I worry that when we look back on it, we might say that this is the week when the Great Pig Plague really took off in Europe.
The outbreak of African swine fever here forced China to import American pork anyway, despite the tariffs.
As we go deeper into 2019, prices should come back up again because the total stock of live hog is just really low. And it also happens to be the year of the pig, so it should be a lucky year for pigs.
That was agriculture expert Tay Lin speaking to CNBC's Yuna Soon back in June. Theo, swine fever is back.
Indeed, it is.
Did it ever go away?
Not really, no. But the big news this year is both that it has exploded for the first time in Southeast Asia, where it's never been before, and also in the past couple of months, it's getting quite big in Eastern Europe. But
it's not something that poses a risk to humans, though, is it, as I understand it? So this is a problem if you're a pig listening to this, or a pig farmer, but not for the rest of us.
It's a big problem for pigs. It's a hemorrhagic fever. It's sort of like Ebola for pigs, though it's less dramatic, but actually more deadly than Ebola. It's about 90% death rate, and it's awful what happens to them. They lose their appetites and become very depressed. Then their ears and abdomens redden. Then they become comatose and lie around in groups, and then they die. There's no vaccine. There's no cure. It's extremely virulent. It's very easy to spread. It's very difficult to destroy. It can stay alive on carcasses and in frozen meat. You can only really cull pigs and put them in quarantine. But the good side is that it does have no impact on human health. It's totally different from swine flu, and in fact you can eat swine fever infected meat with no health effects.
Okay, I'm embarrassed to admit that I saw the headlines about swine fever and thought it was exactly the same as swine flu. Anyone else going to admit to that? Or were you always clear there were two different things?
I'm not going to sit here and say that I'm an expert on the differences between the various pig diseases. But at the same time, it's not something that the experts want spreading any more than it needs to, not just because of obviously the destructive impact on the pig farming industry, but also because there is a concern that the disease could mutate into a strain that might affect humans. Obviously, the emphasis is on trying to eradicate this outbreak.
And there's a financial implication as well, obviously, but specifically, I've seen this being reported in the FT and CNBC and places like that because something to do with the basket of goods that determines the Chinese economy includes pork. Can you explain that to me?
Half of the pigs in the world are in China, and I think it's got a pig population of about 360 million. And the estimates are that about 40 million of them will be killed or dead by the end of the year. It's a very, very large amount of pigs. The Chinese are only admitting that they've killed 1.2 million, but it's probably much, much higher than that. Apparently, the whole world meat production is something like 300 million tonnes. That's all meat across the world. Chinese pork production is estimated to be down this year by 15 million tonnes, so it's a massive effect on the world.
And you mentioned there that the Chinese government might be covering up the true figures of how many pigs they've slaughtered. How's that going to affect the world's ability to combat this disease? Felicity?
Hugely, I think. And one of the aspects of this story is that it's also a political issue. So looking at Bulgaria, for example, where the authorities there have admitted that they have struggled to contain the virus. Bulgaria is the poorest state in the EU. And there are fears that around the world, whether it's Bulgaria or China, farmers will be quietly selling infected meat rather than relying on promises of compensation. So there is that fear, I suppose. But I think also it's a wider story about food production in general, and in particular large-scale industrialized production of food, because what you're seeing now is huge mega farms, and on these mega farms, which are massive sheds where you're kind of shoving in as many animals as you possibly can to kind of meet global demand, diseases like this are much more likely to spread faster through densely concentrated herds, and that means that you're far more likely to have more animals impacted by this, who in turn will then be sent all over the world. So it's quite troubling, and it is about how we are raising our animals and our livestock.
But is that just a blip in terms of the globalization of agriculture? You know, we see these stories. We talked about the threat to banana crops recently. The IPCC reported this week that climate change is making agricultural practices unsustainable. But that's clearly the future, isn't it? These huge mega farms. It's clearly the case that the world economy makes it easier to move food around. And you're going to see stories like this. But does that mean we're all going to go back to just growing our own food?
There's actually a particular thing with this, which is that, in fact, the mega farms, although when it does get into them, it spreads like wildfire. But in fact, the mega farms are they're less likely to be infected by this. This is primarily a backyard pig farming thing. This is why it is so big in China and Bulgaria and places like that, because they feed swill. And the easiest way to spread it is via pig blood. So if you eat anything with pig in it and then you give it back to the pigs, then it goes back round. And then that's where a lot of that is coming from. But it's also spread by wild boar. So in areas where they live quite close to nature, it spreads quite fast. So actually, the big fear is that it will get into the huge pig producers in Western Europe.
Hasn't Denmark just built a massive border to try and keep wild boar away from its pigs? And I think you're seeing that in Belgium as well. These huge borders are going up to keep them out.
Is it called a border? Rebecca.
Yeah, as Theo was just saying, one of the principal ways that it spread is through wild boar. So in Europe, the first cases have been in Romania, and then it's spread to Bulgaria, where cases have spread rapidly because a lot of Bulgarians keep pigs just domestically rather than on an industrial scale, where it is quite easy for, they can't put the same protections in place that you might be able to do on a massive pig farm. But it has caused, actually, as Felicity touched on, there is a political implication as well. Bulgaria is obviously significantly poorer than its neighbour, and while the spread, most experts think it is because of wild boar just swimming across the river on the border between the two countries, the Bulgarian Prime Minister has come out and said that the disease is being spread because of Romanian tourists. He's accused them of eating food and tossing the waste by the sides of the road where wild boar are eating it and becoming infected and then infecting all these good Bulgarian pigs. So there's definitely, it was one of these instances where, a completely unrelated story does bring up a lot of these kind of socio-economic sensitivities between the two countries.
Theo.
They're actually having pig protests in Bulgaria this week. And the Bulgarian Prime Minister did say, I'm sure that the Romanian tourists brought the plague. They eat on the roads and throw away the meat.
But actually, you could clearly imagine the British tabloids taking that tack, couldn't you, on the Bulgarians and the Romanians, if this is something that begins to infect Western Europe. I mean, that is how people react, and it would be true that that's where it's from.
Food sort of things go quite deep with people, don't they? Foreign food, foreign muck, people get quite sort of racist about things like that, don't they?
Sort of feeds into the whole Brexit thing with chlorine-washed chickens and this fear of, lesser quality meat, foodstuffs coming into the UK. And it is, trade deals, it is going to be a serious thing who we're making our deals with. And I suppose the US-China trade wars as well. I think they've already stopped pork imports between the two countries anyway, but yeah, it's definitely going to be a big story in the UK, I think.
Well, it will play into that narrative, won't it, if there is a no-deal Brexit, of we need to grow more of our own food. These are the kinds of reasons why.
Yeah, but I think the reality is going to be that we are just going further afield to import food, and that includes stuff like meat, which does carry a lot of anxieties with it,
But I also wonder whether there are other solutions. So there's no vaccine, is there? And I think one of the ways they are slightly thinking that they can combat this is gene editing, which I don't really know enough about to talk much further on this. But it is interesting that gene editing could be a solution in order to make these pigs resistant to it. Or do we just need to, all stop eating meat and go vegetarian to save the planet?
Well, Theo, where do you think it's going? You brought this to the table as, a story that could have implications for the rest of us. As I say, this is a bad story if you're Chinese or Eastern European. But what are the implications? How bad could this get for everybody else?
The big Western European producers are better at biosecurity than small domestic producers in Eastern Europe. So hopefully it won't happen. But if it gets into the big producers, Germany, Denmark, France, then there will be massive implications. It will be fairly horrendous and pork prices will go up. Farmers will have to have massive compensation. People will go out of business. It will all be very serious indeed, but let's hope it doesn't come to that.
Thank you, Theo. And if you'd like to read more about this topic, there is an in-depth briefing by the digital team. Just head to theweek.co.uk and click podcast. Felicity's up next after this. Felicity, what do you think this week will be remembered for?
This is the week we learn that imitation is the most expensive form of flattery.
Let's rage.
I knew you were gonna come to me. And here you are, but you better choose carefully. 'Cause I'm capable of anything, and everything. Make me your Aphrodite, make me your one and all.
Everyone listening to this on office speakers now is looking around sheepishly. It is for work, honestly. That was the Katy Perry hit single Dark Horse from 2013. Felicity, why has it been in the news this week?
Yeah, so Katy Perry and her team of songwriters have been ordered by a US jury to pay a whopping $2.8 million in damages for copying part of an 11-year-old Christian rap song called Joyful Noise by the rapper Flame.
Okay, well, before we go any further, let's play Judge, Jury and Executioner right here. We have the original track. Let's see if we all come to the same conclusion.
Your boy's been a Christian quite a few years. Victory and faith, but I failed in my fears. I heard a lot of words that have tickled many ears. That's why I praise God for the word that we adhere. The word became flesh, lived for 30 years. Died at 33, but after days reappeared.
Now, the resemblance is obvious, isn't it? It's got a similar riff. But, there are a couple of notes that are different. And couldn't you just say this is inspired by?
I'm going to break this down for you, Ollie. Okay, so what the case pivots on is something called an ostinato. So, and this is the only thing the two songs share. An ostinato is an 8-note repeated melodic fragment. So that which I just so
I'm here for this.
Yeah.
You may not know about gene editing, but ostinato, you're all over.
This is my thing. So there's no similarity in terms of melody, chord progression. The songs are in different keys. They have different beats per minute. But it's this ostinato that you can hear quite clearly from both of them, which is what has led the jury to decide that everyone involved in making this song, including Katy Perry, who only did the lyrics, and Juicy J, who only wrote the lap, they are all liable for this.
Okay, and Rebecca, Theo, what would your opinion be if you were listening in a courtroom to those things? Do you think that's a fair verdict?
I have got such an awful ear for music that it would have to be incredibly egregious to stand out for me as similar.
I think it sounds too generic and basic to me to be something that you would copy.
So what made this case succeed, do you think, Felicity, where others have failed?
I think there are lots and lots of strands with this. I think partly what this comes down to is that it's a huge problem actually trying to determine what constitutes infringement. I think the whole problem of having a jury involved, which is actually quite rare, is also a problem because you're getting a lot of people in who won't really understand kind of very technical aspects of musical theory necessarily, and all they're being asked on is whether the two songs are substantially similar. So I think it's quite hard to make a determination and come to a conclusion. But when the law is so kind of nebulous on this.
But also, in the creative world, if you're inspired by a previous track, that doesn't surely mean that you owe them a financial fee.
Well, yes, this is one of the key questions, and Variety had a really excellent piece on this case where they spoke to people in the industry, and they said that basically there's a concept in film called scène à faire, which is like commonplace scenes, something like a car driving off a cliff, or they use the example of a magician pulling out a rabbit out of the hat.
Yeah.
They said these are
the
things,
amusing meat in the rom-com.
Yeah, exactly. These are all things that we're all very familiar with, even as lay people, and so you can't, it's widely recognised that you can't claim copyright on moments like that in a film, whereas music is a much more technical field in that sense, and it's very difficult for people who aren't experts in music to determine whether, something of originality has been lifted.
It's also really hard to prove whether you've heard the song before, isn't it? I understand that in this case, the defendant said, well, we'd never heard that song, but you can't evidence that, can you? They may have heard it 12 years ago and it's stuck in the back of their head.
That's famously what happened in the copyright case of George Harrison's My Sweet Lord, where it was he was taken to court because it was judged to be too similar to He's So Fine by the Chiffons.
Which it totally is.
Yeah,
in that
and
case.
I think the agreement they eventually came to was that it was unconsciously influenced.
Yeah.
He said he couldn't remember whether he had listened to the song at the same time.
I'm just a defining figure in popular music of the 60s. I've never heard Motown. That was his argument, basically. Yeah, fine. I mean, I'm sure it rubbed them.
But that is now an established concept that you can be subconsciously influenced, but that doesn't necessarily excuse you.
Theo.
It's quite interesting how much it's all changed in the last 20 years. You think that MC Hammer put out "You Can't Touch This" without even acknowledging that he'd nicked the entire tune from Super Freak. And now they're focusing on these tiny little bits that it's quite interesting. The Uptown Funk has sort of 5 or 6 different claims on. People are looking at different musical phrases and saying, well, that was from us. The way that he expressed that word was taken from me. So I think it's reached crazy levels now, hasn't it? I mean,
it's actually become a kind of an industry in and of itself. Like we often hear about how the US has got this culture of frivolous claims, and this actually become a kind of a subfield of that. Because it's relatively risk-free to the plaintiff.
Yeah. But that's the point the Financial Times article was making, that actually the odds are stacked against the superstar because the plaintiff really has nothing to lose. Like, you might as well take a stab at Katy Perry, because if you win, you're going to win big.
Yeah, but it's still, I mean, I don't know how much it costs to lodge a court case in the US, but you're talking tens of thousands, aren't you? It's not free.
It's not free,
and then you're liable for costs, presumably, if you lose.
True,
but that was mentioned in the Variety article, that the courts actually very rarely charge the plaintiff with significant costs, which makes it pretty... The potential gain is so high that it has become an industry. And one of the attorneys that Variety spoke to said that they get so many claims now for basically every hit song, and most of them they refuse to represent. Not all of them will end up, obviously, in court. A lot of times what happens is a judge will hear the case and will take advice from experts and decide whether it should go to a jury trial. Now, some people have said that juries shouldn't be involved because the average person doesn't understand music well enough, and that it should be an arbitration panel of experts. But the counterpoint to that is, of course, in a criminal trial, you might not understand anything about forensics, but that doesn't mean we should replace juries with panels of forensic experts.
Or does it? God, that would broaden out this conversation, wouldn't it? But sticking with pop music, this has been happening ever since pop music was invented. Well, ever since music was invented. Classical musicians used to do this all the time too.
But I think this is, I sort of agree with Theo, and I think, the evolution of music, you are sort of borrowing and building on what's come before, and that's kind of part of it. And I do think it is a worrying trend. You had Robin Thicke and Pharrell Williams' song Blurred Lines. That was probably the most famous one, which they were accused by Marvin Gaye's estate of ripping off Got to Give It Up. And I think one professor observed during the trial that if you're not influenced by Marvin Gaye, there must be something wrong with you. Just look at sampling. There's a whole genre of music where it's taking sections of what's come before and turning it into something new. And I think that should be encouraged. I think that's a really, really good thing. I mean, the thing with sampling is that it would always require something called clearance. If you've sought the permission, then you're fine to do whatever you like. I suppose that's the key difference. But I mean, there's so much of artists being influenced by other artists, and I think that should be celebrated. Just look at Billy Squire's Big Beat, which formed the whole of Dizzy Rascal's Fix Up Look Sharp, Jack White influenced by Led Zeppelin. Like, you're seeing it all the time. And actually, I think the original song, a lot of the time, actually benefits from the song that comes second. You're seeing more people listening to the original track. So there's that kind of mutual...
Well, that's the weird thing. I mean, I'd never heard this Christian rap song until I read
to it all the time.
the lawsuit, and now I've streamed it. So he's earned money from me. I mean, I know 0.02 pence or whatever, but he's earned money from me just comparing the two.
Yeah.
And I wonder if the economics of streaming, Theo, is actually what's underneath all of this. The reason perhaps that we're seeing this increase in lawsuits, despite this being a thing, borrowing, that's happened forever, is that actually if you write a hit song now, you don't necessarily make that much money out of the song, even if it's massive. And the very few people that do, the big blockbuster songs, your Uptown Funks, if you're a musician, you want to earn money from songwriting, those are the people you have to pursue because you're not earning enough from your own stuff.
I think that's right, isn't it? That nowadays the big hits are just disproportionately so much bigger than they used to be, and particularly now that albums are much reduced, and it's singles rather than albums. I guess that's where the money is. So you've got to follow it.
My final thought on this, though, would be... Can I have a final thought?
Well, if you get to say when the conversation's over, Felicity, I'll be the judge.
No, she's just going to stop speaking.
Well, I just think it raises important questions about pop music today and originality anyway, because actually if you look at all the people who are liable in this case, there is like a huge production company behind Katy Perry who put this song together. I'm wondering whether actually these days, if you want to make a cheesy pop music earworm sensation, you're not looking for originality, are you? You are looking for something derivative. You are looking for something that's just going to catch on. There must be a limited number of melodies and ways of putting a song together that they are going to clash. So I just wonder whether we are just getting away from the idea of creating original music anyway.
I was just thinking that, was it Bob Dylan said that he wasn't really a songwriter, and that all of his songs are basically ripped off old blues tunes or Protestant hymns. And, that's how music works, isn't it, to a large extent?
Amen to that.
Okay.
Yeah, they don't have very good copyright claims. So.
Well, very interesting story, and obviously we would never rip off anyone's format, and this show is definitely not a current affairs version of No Such Thing as a Fish. One last story to come after this. And so finally this week, it's Rebecca. What do you think this week will be remembered for?
That was the sound of me saying, play the clip.
If you look at the history of computing, we've always treated computers as external devices that compute and act on our behalf. What I want to do is I want to weave computing, AI, and internet as part of us, as part of human cognition, freeing us to interact with the world around us. Integrate human and machine intelligence right inside our own bodies to augment us instead of diminishing us or replacing us.
That was Arnav Kapoor from technology firm Alter Ego, delivering a TED Talk in June. You can find the whole talk at TED.com. Now, Rebecca, we discussed Elon Musk's AI adventures a couple of weeks back. What's different here? It's a similar sort of idea, isn't it?
Yes and no. So just to sum it up very briefly, Elon Musk's Neuralink project is his idea that you can implant hundreds of transmitters into the brain that will read your thoughts, basically, and allow you to communicate instantly with devices. Mm-hmm. That is really it's an exciting idea, but it is really very much in the future. Maybe I will eat my words in a year for saying that, but it's really nowhere near the stage where it's going to be implanted in people's brains, and not many people seem very keen on that idea anyway. Alter Ego is an external wearable device, and basically the idea is it will act almost like an Alexa that's sort of integrated into your body, but it is not physically integrated into your body. It's not a case of implanting things into your brain. So it works by reading the electrical impulses that go through your muscles. There are like 100 different muscles involved when you speak, but it's not actually it's not reading your thoughts. It's like if you imagine when you learn to read, you start by like sounding out the words specifically in your head, and then you move to a place where you can just read through them. So basically the device isn't reading your thoughts, it's picking up on the signals that run through all those muscles when you're vocalizing a word in your head. So it's not like it would be listening in on your thoughts. It doesn't have the ability to do that. It's not inside your brain.
Regardless, this has been reported as reading your thoughts, hasn't it, Theo? It's been reported as this machine will read your internal monologue. And am I right in thinking most people are hella scared of that?
Well, I was just fascinated that you do have this thing called inner voice, which is, I suppose, if you think about it, there are times when you speak sentences quite clearly in your head, but I had no idea they had some kind of physical reality. And it turns out that they do. Not only that, but this guy can hack into them and then send them to a computer. It's just absolutely fascinating. And he's only...
You're using the word fascinating. I'm using the word scary. Are you a little bit scared? I mean, you wouldn't want to wear this, would you? Unless you were paralysed or something.
They are very clear that there's a clear distinction between your inner voice and your thoughts. And unless you vocalise it inside your head, then they can't tap into it. I'm totally reassured by that.
Yeah. That's how Silicon Valley works, isn't it? Don't be evil. What do you think, Felicity?
It gives me the heebie-jeebies.
Yeah.
But possibly because I haven't understood it as much as well as these two have. Because I was thinking it's nothing sacred. This is like all your darkest thoughts, your fantasies, your insecurities. Someone's now going to like hack in and read them, and we're going to see like the darkest, depraved recesses of humanity revealed, but actually maybe I haven't understood it very well. If I can still keep that protected, I'm a really normal, nice person, by the way. Just wanted to point out. But I think for me, if this can stay in the realms of medicine and particularly helping people with paralysis or other communication problems, brilliant, amazing. Let's do that. But it does make me worried in terms of, I think my problem all along with AI is global regulation. And at the moment, it very much feels like that and quantum computing are like the next frontier of technology. And the regulation just isn't quite there yet. And like some countries like China, for example, see it as a massive arena for international competition and aren't really going to play ball with regulation, whereas other countries are. And I think you only have to look at Facebook, data mining, Cambridge Analytica, and the amazing work by Carol Cadwallader to see that democracy and AI. Wow.
Well, let's talk about some of that stuff. So the data that comes out of this, Rebecca, I haven't read anything about how that might be protected, but imagine if you had access, if you're Facebook or a similar social network in the future, if you had access to not only who people were from what they're looking at online and what they say to the world publicly, but also what they were really thinking at both those junctures. I mean, that's immense.
Yes, but first I should say that this is a research project that's being developed at MIT. It's not going to be on the marketplace, any time imminently. So like those things have not been ironed out, or at least publicly. But I imagine it would work quite similarly to an Alexa, because that's kind of what it is. It's like an internally operated version of an Alexa. The examples that Kapoor gave in his TED talk were things like he had a guy sat there wearing it to demonstrate it, and he said to him, "What's the weather like in San Francisco?" And the guy was, quiet, obviously internalizing it. And then he said, "Oh, it's 50 degrees and cloudy," because he had said in his head, "What's the weather like here?" And the device had basically Googled it, and it's like designed to go into your inner ear, so it wouldn't make a noise that anyone else could hear. So it's kind of almost like if you think about Google Glass, it's basically that, but an audio version, but also has amazing implications, as Felicity touched on earlier, for people who are unable to speak, whether it's through a disease like motor neurone syndrome or because of stroke. And he actually played a video during the TED Talk of a guy with motor neurone disease using it. And we can't underestimate how much of a huge impact that would have, because I think we have a tendency to think, oh, wow, they've got these amazing computers that you can operate with your eyes or by moving your head slightly. But they showed in the video that's such a frustrating process. It can take, like an hour to write a sentence. And when they showed this guy using it, he said to him, "What is the first thing you'd like to do? Well, what would you like to say once we've connected, this wearable device up to your, speaking device?" And they thought he would say, "Hello, blah, 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 blah." And he said, "I want to say reboot computer because the computer is so slow that he uses." And that was the first thing he did. And so the practical benefits to people in that situation, I think, would just be enormous, yeah.
Imagine the people with locked-in syndrome who used to communicate using their eyelids. I mean, amazing, isn't it?
Yeah, it could completely change.
And just think how productive we'd be. You could be on the tube into work, just writing a novel or, creating a shopping list, or you would just get so much done. The other thing is
Wait, so you're totally into it now? You realise how useful it could be. You're completely converted.
Coming around to it. The other thing, I suppose, is it's all to do with speed, right? And how, if it is working on a synaptic level and this just the fastest thing there is, isn't this going to revolutionise trading and computer gaming?
Exactly, Felicity. There are so many potential functions. And also, I think it's like...
One last one, Rebecca. You're not here to sell us alter ego.
I don't know. I feel like I am now.
She's telling it to me.
It's not just about AI. It's about...
Imagine what I'm thinking.
It's about not AI. I think when you think about things like Neuralink, this is so much more of an ingenious and more ethical way of harnessing that kind of technology, because it's not about getting inside your head and reading your thoughts. I think the idea of reading the actual neurotransmitters in your body is so ingenious.
Can you tell us a little bit about Arnav Kapoor? Do you know anything beyond the fact that he's this guy? Because, we talked about Elon Musk and everyone comes with a load of baggage to that name.
He's only 23, so he hasn't accumulated too much baggage. He's a researcher at MIT, and he's actually won several grants to pursue this project. So at the moment, it is a university-based project.
Yeah, but is he the next Mark Zuckerberg? Is that where this is going? To have this level of attention, age 23... And some of the stuff he's invented before seems pretty outside the box.
Well, the weird thing is that a lot of these, well, it's maybe not weird actually, it's probably to be expected, but a lot of these projects are being led by incredibly young people. There's a 16-year-old boy in the US who is developing a system to use graphene to read the electrical impulses around the brain, and that would be a mind-reading device. And he's like 16 years old, so you're pulling your face, Olly, and I think it's justified. I don't think I would want mind-reading power in the hands of a 16-year-old boy, but that is just me.
That silence was the sound of me communicating directly to your brain that is it from this edition of The Week Unwrapped. My thanks to Felicity Capon, Rebecca Gillie and Theo Tait. And let me communicate directly to you that you can subscribe to this show and hear new episodes every 7 days. That's how the structure of a week works. And don't forget those fine magazines, The Week and The Week Junior, also available every week from your local newsagents and online. I've been Olly Mann. Our music is by Tom Morby, the producer Matt Hill at Rethink Audio. Until we meet again to unwrap next week. Bye-bye.